Research that resonates.
Schweizer has not been wrong on any of his years and years of reporting on the Bidens.
Investigations that matter.
If your last name wasn't Biden, do you think you would have been asked to be on the board of Burisma?
I don't know. Probably not. But that's, I don't think that there's a lot of things that would have happened in my life that if my last name wasn't Biden.
The only entities, the only people that would report on this, and Peter Schweizer, who deserves a Medal of Freedom, in my view.
This is The Drill Down with Peter Schweizer.
Hi, this is Peter Schweizer, and welcome to The Drill Down, where we relentlessly expose cronyism, corruption, and the abuse of power in Washington, D.C. The co-host of this program, of course, Eric Eggers. Eric, how are you?
I'm excellent, Peter. How are you?
I'm doing well, except they are still counting ballots in Pennsylvania and still in California. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is correct. I think someone started a very nasty rumor that if you let it go till Black Friday, ballots would go on sale. That's the only explanation I can think of. But the good news is there does seem to be some sanity that's being injected into the process. The Supreme Court's actually weighed in Pennsylvania and said that counties cannot count incorrectly or undated ballots. So
thank you. Hello.
Well, yeah, you'd think that, hey, it seems like you might have a problem counting some ballots without dates. Now, some people are trying to dismiss this as, it's an of old, outdated law where you have to sign
right.
and date the thing on the outside of the envelope. Right. What's crazy, though, is people in Bucks County, Montgomery County, and Philadelphia County have said that they're like openly flouting the law. Like, well, the law is the law, but one person, the Democratic Bucks County commissioner, said people violate laws anytime they want. So for me, if I violate this law, it's because I want a court to pay attention. There's nothing more important than counting votes.
By the way, can you imagine a guy getting a DWI and saying, I did it because I wanted the attention of the court? I mean, it's absurd. It's absurd.
What I love about this is like counting votes is more important than following the law is the new COVID's bad. You should stay inside unless you're experiencing racism, in which it's okay to go outside and protest.
Right, and protest. Exactly. Yeah. So we're going to keep watching that. Of course, Eric has been on top of this for years. And we've also got the Trump administration coming in because there is an election that was settled. That was the presidential election, of course. And Donald Trump is the new president, and he has a reform agenda, a broad reform agenda in mind, wants to shake things up in Washington. And we have a guest today who's going to help us roadmap what to look for in the Trump administration. He may potentially, we're not going to ask him about this, but he may potentially play a role in this down the roll and sort of to get his assessment. So we want to bring on the program Richard Corcoran. I've known Richard for a long time. He's the former Speaker of the Florida House of Representatives, a reformer there. He was also the Commissioner of Education in Florida, made a lot of radical changes there. And he has a new book out based on his experiences as the president of New College in Florida. New College, of course, was kind of the Berkeley of Florida, as it were, really bad standards, a lot of wokeness. He has a new book out talking about his battles there, and it is titled Storming the Ivory Tower, How a Florida College, that is New College, correct?
Yes.
Became ground zero in the struggle to take back our campuses. Joining us now, Richard Corcoran. Richard, how are you?
It's great to be on the show, Peter. And I'll have to give you a shout out. I mean, one of the key components of the book is the great endorsements I got on the back cover, which is, of course, one of from you. So thank you.
Absolutely glad to do that. And Eric has been tracking education a lot. What's your sense of the reaction when Richard Corcoran became president of the college?
Well, I want to tell you, Richard, just as a heads up, Peter also gave me a blurb quote, and I'm not saying it was awesome for the book sales. So I just want to temper expectations for you and the publisher. The coattails vary depending upon the way. But I think your book is an important one because your story of what you've done at New College, I think, is actually sort of indicative of what the rest of the nation responded to a couple of weeks ago. It said, we're going to kind of reject these cultural outliers, and we don't think that represents where mainstream America is. You fought tooth and nail to be able to do that. Why are you so proud of it? What's the biggest takeaway that you want people to have when they read your book?
I always say, this isn't a new argument. We've been talking about this for 60, 70 years. William F. Buckley, as a student at Yale, writes a book in the early 50s saying, hey, there's indoctrination going on. They're teaching me that, American capitalism isn't good. Then, 30, 40 years later, Alan Bloom comes out with Closing the American Mind. Hey, there's a lot of indoctrination going on. what we're trying to say is, okay, for the third time or the umpteenth time, there's a lot of indoctrination going on, but you can fight it. And the problem is we need to have a roadmap. We need to have a strategy to go head on and fight it. And what the Governor DeSantis did was you got to have great leadership. Governor DeSantis said, this is a public institution. We're not going to have, as you said, Peter, a radicalized Berkeley indoctrination camp. And I'm changing it. This is taxpayer money. And he appoints an amazing board with great lawyers, great academics, Christopher Rufo, Matthew Spalding, Mark Bauerlein, all these, Charles Kessler, just great people, puts them on the board, and they're willing to fight. They're like, we'll fight. And then they chose me to be on the ground. And every day is a fight. But the point is, if you do that, you can win. And that's what we got to start doing now on all fronts, is fighting. I think that's what you're hearing from the president-elect.
Well, and that's why we wanted to have you on, Richard, obviously to talk about the book and encourage people to buy the book, but also what you did as Commissioner of Education, what you are now doing as the president of New College, is a roadmap to what the Trump administration hopefully is going to try to do at the federal level. Now, granted, the federal bureaucracy is bigger. There's a lot more money at stake, but that makes the battle all the more necessary. And here's what I want you to kind of comment on, what you think the approach needs to be. Because, my concern is, it's one thing to sort of fly in and drop a few bombs, right? Make some speeches, fire a couple of people, but this is not an air war. This is a trench war. You've actually got to get in the trenches and fight these guys in the trenches. You need to know where the trenches are. You need to do close combat. And so you've got to have people that have that skill set. So looking at the Trump administration in general, where do you think they are in that? And what is some advice that you would give to people taking these positions in the bureaucracy that are reform-minded?
Yeah, so it's easy. I'll tell you, this is where I agree with President Trump. I think you need to go in and immediately, and he's choosing amazing disruptors. I mean, people's heads are coming off because these people are just completely disruptive. And he needs to do that. He needs to choose a great disruptor. And then they need to go in there and they need to gut the Department of Education. They need to demolish the Department of Education. They need to, blow it up, so to speak, but they should never abolish it. The key is to send in a group, that leadership team, and go in there and use the power of the purse, use the power of the law to your advantage. I always say to people, if the teachers union right now, how many people have we heard the teachers union say, oh my gosh, this is terrible. Don't abolish the Department of Education, and don't send it to the state and locals. That would be horrible, horrible, horrible. They're not saying it. I think they're sitting on the sideline saying, this can't be true. This is too good to be true. Are you kidding me? They're going to send it all down to the locals and the states where we, in essence, dominate. I mean, literally dominate. Yeah. And that's where all of the pernicious policies, how many bad policies were passed at the Department of Education federally when Donald Trump was there with Betsy DeVos? The answer is none. How many in that same 4-year time frame and the local level and at the state level with these union dominated entities, bad policies, regulations, bureaucracy were being implemented and effectuated at those levels? Maybe 1 million, hundreds of thousands. And so I think what he needs to do is go in there. And just like we did, you guys are Floridians. What we did is we used the State Department of Education to say, no, you're opening up schools. No, you're not forcing masks. No, you're not indoctrinating kids. No, you're not putting out indoctrination textbooks. We just went through every single aspect and said, you're going to comply, or we're not going to give you tens of millions of dollars. On the federal level, you're talking about billions of dollars. And just like the nation, we have, very, very liberal counties. We got Miami-Dade, Broward's, Palm Beaches. We have California's on the federal level and New York's and Chicago's, you name it. You think Governor Newsom is going to say, oh, keep your billions of dollars. We're not complying. It's never going to happen. And Donald Trump is the kind of guy who can bring those guys to their knees the same way we did him.
No, it's actually a great point, because as many concerns as you might have about the U.S. Department of Education, the California State Department of Education would say, hold my beer, right? It's actually not beer. It's a cocktail of liberal ideology and LGBT stuff. No, it's a great point.
Yeah. And I say, Eric, I always say, I think the most ideologically dominated body in elective politics are local school boards. And the reason is because they basically are filled, but with a majority of one profession, teachers. And those teachers went into the classroom, became card-carrying union members rose up in the ranks, then decided, okay, you're going to run for office, supported by the teachers union, gets on the school board because there's very few people playing in those races, and then once on the school board, becomes an absolute lackey for the teachers union. And so we cannot allow them one more foothold ever.
So, but it's tricky, right? Because you're talking about, I think, if I hear you correctly, positioning the U.S. Department of Education as sort of a check and on the worst state and local election systems. How would that work? I mean, one of the reasons why I think you're the perfect person to talk about this, and maybe a perfect person to kind of advise on how this should actually happen at the federal level, because you ran Florida's K-12 system. You now interface with the U.S. Department of Education as the president of a university in the state university system. So what does the appropriate role of the U.S. Department of Education look like, given that power may eventually go back and you may have Democrats in charge? So you kind of don't want to give it too much power, but you want it to be able to kind of guide and shape, I guess, what I'm hearing you saying at the state and local level.
Well, I can give example after example, Eric, but I think one that's really an easy example, it's using the power of the purse. And I would say it's really a hammer. It is an absolute hammer. And you use that. And so the federal government sends down billions of dollars, $1 billion, whatever that number is, for charter school startup, because it's very expensive to start up a charter school, which is a choice aspect dominated by, in Florida by low-income families. They're put up in areas where there's, very, very high poverty rates and very, very high poor performing schools. And so we send the money down, but these schools need money to start up. They need to buy the chairs, the books, all those kinds of things. And that's sent down to the state. Then the state has a bureaucracy, and that bureaucracy is just supposed to, check the box. Did they put in an application? Was it correct? Are they, do they have a good board? And send them the money. They don't. They harass. If you're in California, you're getting harassed by the Department of Education. They're denying your application. They're saying, you know what, you didn't send it to us in triplicate. And then you could say, okay, I'll send you the other two copies. And they're like, too late, wait till next year. That's what's happening. But now you have a Donald Trump Department of Education, and we want a greater choice, greater opportunities for students and parents to have that ability to send their child where they want to send them, not where the government tells them to send them. And now we say, no, that money better get to the charter districts, or we're shutting you down on all these different other aspects, and we'll do it ourselves. I mean, it's a case study after case study after case study like that. Look at in the book, I talk about the Little Johns and the Perez's. Were they harassed by the federal government? Were they harassed by the state? No and no. Who they were absolutely abused by was the local government with the blessings of different higher ups. And so you have your own prized daughter being literally transgendered by the school district, and you have no idea, 12 years old. You have your child who's tried to commit suicide, and you're not even told. That's happening at the local school districts. And you basically say, if you're trying to transgender a child, if you're not doing full transparency and empowering parents, we're shutting down your funding. And those people will buckle just like they did in Florida with forcing the opening of schools and demasking and all the other things we did.
Just to be very clear to the point of the local school board, the two examples he just gave happened in Florida with a very conservative state government. So
no, that's exactly right. Now, Richard, you referenced that it's really a hammer. And of course, what I would say for people who don't know you is you're a hammer, but you are what James Baker used to be called during the Reagan administration. He was called the Velvet Hammer because he did it very calmly and very smoothly. So he delivered it with force. You've certainly done that in Florida. We're talking to Richard Corcoran, author of Storming the Ivory Tower. I want to switch to higher education right now. And there's a clip that we want to play from Donald Trump talking about what's going on in higher education ideologically. And after the clip, I want you to tell us what you think the solution is at the higher education level in dealing with this ideological assault that's taking place. But let's listen to President-elect Trump.
Americans have been horrified to see students and faculty at Harvard and other once respected universities expressing support for the savages and jihadists who attacked Israel. We spend more money on higher education than any other country, and yet they're turning our students into communists and terrorists and sympathizers of many, many different dimensions. We can't let this happen. It's time to offer something dramatically different.
Richard, your thoughts on that and how you actually do it. Is it about the purse? Are there other things that you have done at New College that can be done at the national level at the Department of Education?
What needs to be done is literally start from ground zero and go through every single aspect of it and change it. So, I mean, I'll just rattle off a few. Our accreditor system. Under the first administration of President Trump, he said that you could switch accreditors. You weren't locked into having one accreditor. And by the way, pretty much all the accrediting agencies have, mandatory DEI, all of these different aspects. They get involved. You guys probably remember I was actually a candidate for FSU presidency, and Sachs, the accreditor, read a newspaper article, and because of a newspaper article that they never even called or verified, sent a letter to the people on the search committee saying you can't choose Corcoran because this article suggests that there's a conflict of interest when there was none. And that led to the state saying, every single entity that's accredited by Sachs, at the end of your accreditation period, you must choose somebody else. And it broke Sachs. It broke them at their knees. And that was from initially Donald Trump and the administration said you can change accreditors. But guess what? Florida has numerous universities and colleges applying to change accreditors, and they're like doing the exact same thing on the federal level. We need your form in triplicate. You need to give us the financials. None of it required by the law. None of it. Just harassing. We haven't had one school able to switch accreditors because DOE harassing us in violation of the law. But then you also got to go through and get rid of all the DEI. What October 7th and as Donald Trump, the savage and absolute horrific event that took place, a silver lining, if you can say there's one, is everyone, just like COVID opened up K-12 schools and everyone saw what was going on, October 7th opened up the university and said, wait a second, this is insane. I always say it's like Animal Farm from George Orwell. Hey, all of us are equal, but some are more equal than the others, and we'll let you know who those people are. And basically, if you're a white or you're not, LGBTQ or, you're not in the club. And Harvard's was DEIB. They added belonging, but you don't belong if you're one of these people. Even Bill Ackman, this is a guy who's like given to Clinton's, Obama's, not a conservative historically. He sees what's going on. He says DEIB needs to go, and we need to change scratch it from the top down because it's a pernicious ideology that's destroying the academic environment. Gender ideology as a discipline, it's insanity. So now you have biologists who can't teach kids a biology course that there's two genders. I mean, this is what's going on throughout the universities. You have to go after all of it. And I could go on and on, Peter, from the bottom to the top. You have to go through and scrub it.
My takeaway from that, Richard, is that you've been spending so much time in woke higher ed in spaces. You're now like a DEI hipster. You know about the B. I never even heard of the B. Have you heard of the B? Be honest.
I've never heard
Neither
of the B.
one of us know about the B. And you were there. You're like, oh, there's a B now. So, I mean, I think that's the headline from DEI. It's growing.
And and they're so good at gaslighting. They literally take these great terms like diversity or belonging, and they really are doing the complete opposite. There's no belonging unless you are one of those. We are all equal, but some are more equal than others. It's insanity. They literally gaslight us at New College when we say they're stymieing academic freedom and they're shutting down free speech when we're the ones that are opening it up from what was shut down and where there was no academic freedom.
I think it's a good point about October 7th, but I also think how pandemic opened up schools. The DOE budget, the Department of Education budget, currently is scheduled to be, I think, $238 billion based on some stats I've seen. Mm-hmm. It was up to $637 billion during COVID because of all the extra money that was being spent. And there's been congressional hearings about where money. Now, this is true for K-12 as well as higher ed. But they're saying something like $190 billion was allocated through something called Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief. Richard, I know when you were involved with the Department of Education at the K-12 level, you saw some of this. But they're saying that money got spent on diversity, equity, inclusion, critical race theory, gender ideology. Like, there's a lot of stuff that happened at the K-12 level. I'm sure that happened at the university level as well, maybe even at, in greater detail. How much of that have you seen, and is that something you spent your time at New College trying to unwind? Is like, wait, we're spending money on this?
Yeah, so going back to those recommendations, I'm not just saying it. We did it and have done it and are continuing to do it at New College with the great leadership that we have. One of the first actions of the new board members was we ended the DEI office. We actually fired people. We didn't just move them around. And that led to the state passing legislation that's saying all universities and colleges cannot have to eliminate DEI. And they're in the process of doing it. The nice thing about it, New College with our great board, we don't have to be told. We didn't have to be told to eliminate gender studies as a discipline. We did it on our own. But those things are not just in existence. They're dominating the culture. If you're a professor and you want to teach something, you basically get called before their arm of justice, their ministry of discipline and laws. And you get called before them, which is the DEI office, and they tell you, you cannot say it in a classroom, you cannot teach that, you can't use that book. It's rampant and it's dominating the cultures. All of that stuff has to go, and that's what we did at New College. To your point, Eric, we eliminated it on day one. We actually fired people. And there's even in Florida, there's universities that send out, okay, the legislature and the governor are forcing us to get rid of DEI, so we're closing it down. But wink, wink, nobody's getting fired. We'll move you to other offices, and we still believe it matters. That all of that stuff needs to be shut down.
So in Washington, D.C., if Eric is appointed the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of Education, what would you say the first thing is that he should try to do if they're facing some of these problems of a bureaucracy? DEI is out of control. Bureaucracy is out of control. It's woke. What do you think the first thing somebody should do in that kind of situation based on your experience?
I think I know this is a little academic, Peter. I think the first thing you have to do is you're going to say, what is the philosophy of the Federal Department of Education going to be? And I think it needs to be something that we are going to ensure, we're going to protect and ensure that students are getting a world-class education, and that is defined as such. And then from that, so everyone in the whole department needs to know we don't care about the teachers union. We don't care about the union bosses. We don't care about the elites. What we are going to do is be about teaching truth, teaching kids how to think, not what to think, and on all levels. And then you start going through every single department right now, and then you start eliminating those things. I think you have to get rid of bad philosophy first. So wherever there's bad philosophy and ideology, you have to eradicate it. And that again, I mentioned some of them, Peter, but it's even the textbooks. You need to shut down these publishers. We did that in Florida. You need to rewrite the standards or have federal standards that you say, here's the acceptable ELA standards and math standards, so that people are actually getting taught the things that matter and they're being taught it in an objective, truthful manner. You've got to get rid of the ideologies. I think really third or fourth down the list, and you got Elon Musk and Vivek to take care of it. Most of the money, even at the state level of Department of Education, goes just to the per student funding. And then after that, it's personnel. Probably the biggest cuts I think you're going to see in the Department of Education will be, we don't need this many bureaucrats. And we're going to get, and you'll probably get rid of funding for things like, I don't know how much funding they're giving to libraries. I honestly think if you go through, which we've done in Florida and let alone the rest of the nation, the most pernicious, crazy, and I hate to say it, but crazy ass textbooks and books are found in libraries. The whole association of librarians, it's a cult. They buy each other's books, they load them up in their library, and they're just filled with rot. They're filled with bad ideology. But I think you got to go through all of that stuff, and funding for like those types of things, you can talk about, we're cutting it all together. But I think, have your philosophy based in truth and objectiveness and an ROI for students getting that world-class education, and then go through and systematically start where the ideology is everywhere, eliminating the ideological craziness that's taken place over the last 60 years.
Ironically, I think the last time I was in a bookstore, I saw a book called The Crazy Ass Textbook. So I think that, it's at a college campus near you. And, it's unclear what class it was for. Hey, quickly, because, you know so many things and, you're such a good guest for this. So just quickly on this, because I know we have a couple of things we want to ask you about. Student loans. U.S. Department of Education is terrible on student loans, and they've been terrible on the budgeting for it. They expected those student loans to make something like $10 Like they were off by $10 billion a year on average. They expected it to make $100 billion over a 20-year period. It ended up costing them $200 billion. Is that something that they should just get out of the business of, or reform, or what?
I think you have to have that meaningful discussion. I think it's a discussion worth having. There's private entities out there that are doing it that aren't costing taxpayers tons of dollars. And I think when you have those kinds of subsidies, what you're seeing is the gross increase in tuition over the last 25, 30 years, because, it's subsidized by the federal government with these very favorable student loans, and more people are going and getting, in essence, I tell people when they come to the college, you've probably heard the rhetoric, go for 4 years, take out tons of debt, and you have a useless degree. And I tell them that's true. I wouldn't send my kids to probably 90% of the schools in America. And I'm trying to be fair. It might be 99%, but and because that's which is what is going to happen. But I also think failing doing something like that and having that radical transformation, student loans are another hammer. You're not eligible, Governor Newsom, and none of your institutions are eligible for student loans unless you behave and comply with all of these edicts. It's a great hammer.
I love it. Well, we've been talking to Richard Corcoran. He's got a terrific new book out called Storming the Ivory Tower. I don't know if he's on the list, but we may have found the new education secretary. I don't know. This is terrific.
Well, I think he was on the list until he said he wouldn't send his kids to 99% of the schools. That's not a campaign slogan, Richard. I just quickly, you are a Florida guy, we're a Florida guy, and one thing that President-elect Trump is doing is he's essentially calling up the Florida forces, right? The Sunshine State SWAT team is being sent in. A lot of the people that are being called in the administration, just if you wanted people that are listening now to know one thing about Marco Rubio, who you used to work for, and Matt Gaetz, who you used to work with, what would you tell them?
I've worked with these guys for a long time, and not only are they disruptors, they actually have a record of game-changing policies and enactments. And it's not just the choices for the cabinet. The chief of staff is a Floridian, Susie Wiles, deputy chiefs of staff, Taylor Budowich and James Blair. These guys are all Floridians who came up in the ranks and have been transformational wherever they have gone. I think so far to date, without question, and I don't think it's going to change, Trump has sent a message to the world that enough is enough, and we're going in there and we're transforming, and they really, really are going to make America great again.
Well, I think we need a new term. I don't know if it's going to be the Palm Tree Mafia or the Sunshine State Mafia, but yeah, Florida's ascendant, and thank God California is not. Because we would have gotten that with Kamala Harris. We encourage everybody to pick up Richard's new book. Richard, thank you for all the great work you're doing. You are a reformer, and you really are the velvet hammer, which we appreciate. You always do it with class and style and with toughness when necessary. And we thank you, the audience, for taking the time to listen to this podcast as you do. We know your time is valuable. You can find out more about the research we do at thedrilldown.com. And, of course, you can subscribe to this podcast wherever fine podcasts can be located. Thanks again. Until next time.